Test, mic check, microphone 2.
Hello? Mic test?
Hello? Hello? Mic check, mic check, test, mic check. Hello? Mic check, mic check, test. 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Max na to, Jay. Jay, naka-max na to. Mag-dual connection yung internet. Check. Hello. Test, test. Mic check. Check, 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 check. Okay. Off mo muna yung mic ko.
As far as we know, there's 121 participants in Zoom. That's amazing. Thank you for your support. But at the same time, I totally get it. Today's talk is totally going to be lit. Is that how younger Gen Z say it? Anyway, this is this year's fifth episode of Monthly Ethics Seminar Series, or yes, thank you to our coordinator for for giving us the correct and beautiful abbreviation of our program. It's MESS. And MESS is a public service information drive and a regular mainstay activity of the UP Diliman Research Ethics Board. And it happens monthly. That's right. UPD Rebs MESS every month. Mark your calendars. Do it now. I mean it. I'm watching. But the reason you should catch every episode is that MESS features lectures and discussions on the responsible conduct of research, especially research involving human participants. The topics, too, are highly relevant to the current and very diverse research and scholarly needs of UPD and other academic institutions. This is because MESS is cognizant, sentient, and mindful, cognizantful of the need to be constantly up to date with the latest ethical approaches and standards in research. That said, MESS is designed to be informal, conversational, kapatid, usap tayo. Hence, the idea of exchanging insights over lunch. Yup, mess is mess as in mess hall and not mess as in my sinuses at the moment. Now you must be wondering, who is this beautifully unhinged woman speaking in front of me? And the answer would be, hi, I'm Bridget Diaz, your moderator for today's discussion. I was also the moderator for the last mess. Did you mess me? I hope you also messed that joke because that's recycled. All of that being said, again, welcome to Mess. Before we begin, here are some reminders. Everyone is encouraged to have their lunch while listening to the guest speaker. And for our on site attendees, we have free flowing water at the back. Stay hydrated. I know I need to. Please take note of your questions. We will have an open forum where you can participate actively in polls, Q&A, and discussions. As for polls, that's mostly for our virtual attendees. And speaking of our virtual attendees, please make sure to keep your microphone muted when not speaking. I will also do the same, even if I'm a yapper. To receive your certificates after MESS, fill out the evaluation form that will be given at the end of the seminar. Certificates of attendance are given to online participants, and certificates of participation are given to on-site participants. For our online attendees, your QR code for the evaluation form will be flashed on the screen near the end of the program and also sent through the Zoom chat box. For on-site attendees, please see your QR code for the evaluation form at the registration area near Miss Flora Tagiling, my senator. But without further ado, Pierre Bourdieu, who is today's esteemed guest speaker. Drum roll, please. Dr. Iris Thiel Isiptan is a professor at the University of the Philippines College of Medicine. She is also chief at the University of the Philippines Medical Informatics Unit and director at the University of the Philippines Manila Interactive Learning Center. She is a practicing internist endocrinologist with a master's degree in health informatics. Her research interests include mobile health, consumer health informatics, and telehealth. She believes in the scholarly use of social media and is currently enrolled as a PhD student in health sciences by research at the University of the Philippines, Manila, with her work focused on social media misinformation. Dr. Iris Thiel Isiptan paved the way for a college-wide initiative on the use of educational technology at the UP College of Medicine, conceptualizing the online component of an endocrinology module, highlighting the use of social media and blogs for both graduate and undergraduate health informatics electives. She also developed a course for doctors to barrios using blended learning. As director of the UP Manila Interactive Learning Center, she was able to conceptualize programs, facilitate workshops, and compose a faculty guide as the institution transitioned to blended and then remote learning when the pandemic began. Are you intimidated yet? Presenting Artificial Intelligence and Ethics Review, let us welcome the endocrine witch, Dr. Iris TL Isiptan.
So thank you for that kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here in UP Diliman where I spent my pre-med. Thank you for the kind invitation to give a presentation today on AI and ethics review. So I actually first gave this lecture at the conference of the Philippine Health Research Ethics Network last year. And when I was asked to do this lecture on AI assisted ethics review, I said immediately, no, I do not agree. AI is not human and therefore it has no human context or morality. But, I went ahead with the lecture because I wanted to learn more. And so I'm very excited to do this again today. I am not on any institutional review board, but I am a researcher and therefore I am a stakeholder in the ethics review process. So I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, but I did use perplexity.ai to help me find references for this presentation. So with this presentation, I will attempt to answer three questions. First, what role, if any, should AI play in ethics review? Second, what about an AI-assisted IRB draft generator? And when I asked people about this, many researchers said, yes, please. Okay. And lastly, can Google's LLM Gemini be a reviewer? I have not had opportunity to try other LLMs because I did not update the lecture, but um, I'm pretty sure the others can also do it as well. And I will have some interesting experiments to show you at the very end. So let us start with the first question. What role, if any, should AI play in ethics review? So what is the context here? Why do research ethics boards need AI assistance? Well, ethics review requires reading complex documents, which can have hundreds or maybe thousands of pages to identify relevant ethical issues to make suggestions for improvement to researchers. And often, researchers complain that the process takes too long and that it can be inconsistent between reviewers. So, is that a gap that AI can address? Can it actually speed up the process and make it consistent? Perhaps. AI can rapidly spot ethical issues and suggest solutions. However, I must declare that I am squarely in the camp of human in the loop AI. So I agree with Colstow that reviewing tasks are not actually the same as making an ethics decision, and that the decision to actually adopt a course of action is fundamentally human. So ethics review is a multi-step process. So Nickel writes, and that automated task support is no substitute for a meaningful dialogue between the reviewers and researchers. The human elements of trust, accountability, and moral judgment cannot be effectively automated. Now, I don't know if some people will disagree, but as a researcher, that improving the substance of the decision rather than the speed with which it could be delivered is paramount. So Nickel further advises to guard against the possibility that reviewers will become over-reliant on automation, and that is automation bias. If research ethics boards are to consider automation, determine first which parts should be automated by consensus. The possibility of automating some parts of the ethics review process must be discussed in an inclusive and open manner. So I asked myself as a researcher, would I want to be informed? Would I find it okay if the research ethics board will be using AI on my research protocol? So I also do workshops on AI tools for research. And one of the things we worry about is if you upload a protocol, for example, to Claude or to ChatGPT, and you're on the free version, does that go into the training data set? And so if another researcher elsewhere has the same topic as you, maybe the protocol you uploaded will now be shared to the other person asking the same thing, losing sort of your intellectual property. So I am a PhD by research student, and I know from experience that everyone dreads the IRB forms. And in the first part of my presentation, I discussed how AI can assist the reviewer. But maybe the IRB will also benefit if we assist the researcher in preparing the IRB form. So interestingly, I found a journal publication that uses generative AI to streamline the creation of IRB applications. So what is generative AI? Generative AI relies on deep learning models to create original content in response to a user prompt. So if we were to have an IRB draft generator, this would be the functionalities. And when I shared this article on my Facebook wall, so many people said, yes, we need this now. The use of generative AI for drafting is the core functionality of this software. And it integrates user input with literature search results and a predefined template structure. So what user input is required? So this is the flow chart in that publication. So they need the hypothesis, the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria, and the study design. So I was also very interested in the author's use of the PubMed API because most of our biomedical research is in PubMed, as large language models like ChatGPT hallucinate references. So have you ever tried to ask for references from ChatGPT? In the workshops I run, it can be anywhere from 40 to 60% of references being hallucinated, at least for the free version. So what is a hallucination? A hallucination is when the generative AI creates real-looking citations that actually do not exist. They can be very convincing. It will even have a digital object identifier or a DOI, but when you click it, you can't find it online. And there are several papers that have already talked about this phenomenon. And sometimes when I talk to people in the computer science field, they tell me hallucinations, those are not bugs. Those are features of the system. Okay. So the authors point out, however, that LLMs are adept at using contextual information from text to create reasonable search queries. So their solution was to integrate the PubMed application programming interface or API so the software can query PubMed and retrieve the relevant literature and incorporate this into the draft. So the authors note that it is still possible that you're going to get hallucinated summaries using the literature search tool. But if the references are pulled directly from the PubMed, at least we will know, or at least there's some guarantee that these references actually exist. So I have an anecdote. Someone on X or Twitter is a prominent researcher in polycystic ovarian syndrome, and she was on the guideline development, and she was trying to use ChatGPT if ChatGPT could retrieve the latest journal so that they could update the clinical practice guideline. And she received a list of papers, several of which were allegedly authored by her, which actually do not exist. So it seems that ChatGPT at least knows who are the prominent researchers in that field, and that's why it makes up those things. So this is the screenshot of the interface of the IRB assistant that was described in this paper. It will ask for the research question and the relevant literature and citations. So the web-based interface provides instructions to fill out the form and dialog boxes for the user to input their information. So after submission, the generative AI creates the draft and provides a downloadable document to the user. So to help ensure that the researchers clearly review and revise the draft, upon accessing the tool, they have to acknowledge disclaimers, as you can see in this screenshot. So what does it say? You are in charge of the content in the documents this tool creates, and so on and so forth. So this tool uses AI to create a starting point for the department protocol form. So it says it should make your work faster, but it can't do all the work for you. Always check and fix your drafts. The tool makes a basic version of the protocol from the information you provide. Some details may be left out and others may not fit your work. Remember, skilled professionals will be checking your work. If you submit without changes, it will be rejected. So it's sort of forcing a human in the loop approach. Why do we need that? Because there have been things that's happened like this one. So the paper is from a group of Chinese authors, and I will presume that perhaps they did help with English. And when this was posted on Twitter and people were commenting about it, the paper did not get retracted immediately. It took several months, actually. What can you see in the introduction? How can you tell that the authors actually used ChatGPT? It says, certainly, here is a possible introduction for your topic. So it really looks like a copy paste. So one wonders, how did it get past the editorial process, right? So that's why we need to make sure that our processes always involve a human. This one involved humans, and yet it still happened. So the other human engineering mechanism the authors incorporated in the tool was to have a checklist of to-dos for the researcher, like adding the names of the principal investigator, co-investigator, confirming our IRB and GCP training, confirming the list of variables to be collected, adding sample size information, and the study budget as appropriate. So siguro they will say, huh, why do I have to do all that? Akala ko ba it's generative AI? But it's really to make sure that humans are in the loop. So the draft output is actually incomplete. And if it is submitted as it is, it will surely be detected as unsupervised by humans, unrevised by humans. So what's nice about having the LLM, however, draft the protocol, is that it can do text simplification. The LLM can write for a non-technical audience so that reviewers who may not have specific domain knowledge can still understand the protocol to be able to properly review it. I'll show you an example. Luma na to eh. Okay? So imagine if you were to review this paper, The Art of the Impossible, How Compressed Sensing Turns Less into More. Compressed sensing aims to undersample certain high-dimensional signals yet accurately reconstruct them by exploiting signal characteristics. Accurate reconstruction is possible when the object to be recovered is sufficiently sparse in a known basis, etc., etc. So it's not in my field. I don't actually understand it. But Ben Golub took this apparently famous paper, maybe some of you know this, and asked Claude to rewrite its introduction in the style of Malcolm Gladwell while preserving the mathematical content. So what happened? Imagine for a moment that you could capture the essence of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in just a handful of notes or express the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile. So, umaba siya. Certainly, it's entertaining, sounds like Malcolm Gladwell. And hopefully, it also helps us understand what is compressed sensing. Okay, because in the end, it still goes into what if we could throw out the rule book and underdetermine the high dimension signals, etc., etc. So these are what LLMs are good at. They can actually make it simpler or make it even, like I said, something like Malcolm Gladwell. Now, preparing for this presentation got me very curious. And if you have a Google email account, you can access Google AI Studio. And in fact, if because my lecture is very short, maybe you want to try doing it on other LLMs. But my experiment was I asked myself, what if I asked Gemini to be a reviewer? Okay. So I wanted to see if I could get proof of concept. So I think the friend conference was around October, okay, last year. So can a large language model actually do an ethics review? So I looked for a published protocol because I didn't want to upload any unpublished protocol from myself, however, since I was afraid it will become part of the training data set. Okay, so I chose Google AI Studio and I constructed a prompt asking Gemini to review the protocol. And I'll show you what I asked in the next slide. Lastly, I wanted to read the article and actually assess the quality of the ethics review, or at least check if Gemini adequately identified the possible ethical issues. So we have a journal called the Journal of Medical Internet Research, or JMIR Research Protocol. So it is a journal that publishes protocols. And on its homepage last year, I found this article easily. And I felt, what a provocative title. I think we can look for ethical issues. Why? Because the title is Establishing the Foundations of Emotional Intelligence in Care Companion Robots to Mitigate Agitation Among High-Risk Patients with Dementia. Protocol for an Empathetic Patient-Robot Interaction Study. Okay, so what you see on the slide is actually the interface for Google AI Studio. So if you have a Gmail account, you can try it for free. Well, it's not exactly free. You're actually helping Google train Gemini. And in this interface, it is possible to upload documents. So I actually uploaded the protocol from the journal webpage here on Google AI Studio, and that's the PDF that you see there that I didn't even bother renaming PDF.pdf. Okay, so Gemini has the largest context window of compared to the other LLMs like ChatGPT and Claude. And you can see there that it says it can handle up to 1 million tokens. I haven't checked recently if they have increased the number of tokens. But when you upload something, it will tell you how many tokens you've already used up. And in this case, it used 33,348 tokens. So you can actually upload multiple things as long as you don't go over the token count. So think of tokens as characters. And then it is also possible to choose which Gemini model to use because they have several. In this case, it was Gemini 1.5 Flash. Then I wrote a simple persona prompt, which included instructions, context, and the output I wanted. So here's the prompt. What I told Gemini: review the attached research protocol. You are a reviewer on the institutional review board. Identify ethical issues. List questions for the authors to clarify the ethical issues. And the model responded within seconds. And it began with this statement: the research protocol presents a well-designed study, but there are a few ethical issues that require further clarification. And what are those ethical issues? Actually, the screenshot did not cover all of it, but it categorized the issues into 3 headings: informed consent from participants with dementia, data security, and beneficence. So what I did, I went back to the protocol. I tried to look if it indeed the ethical issues raised were there, and it was there. Okay, so now remember, the second part of my prompt was to list clarificatory questions for the authors. Again, it listed the clarificatory questions under the 3 headings of informed consent, data security, and beneficence. So it ended with Gemini saying, these questions should help the authors clarify the ethical implications of the research and strengthen the protocol. Addressing these issues will help to ensure that the study is conducted in a way that protects the welfare and the rights of participants. So now for me, this was a successful demonstration of proof of concept. Kaya niyang gawin, kaya niyang mag-ethics review. So then I thought, we have a UP Manila REB protocol assessment form. I-upload ko kaya yon. Sabihin ko sa kanya, can you fill it up for me as a researcher? And yes, nagawa niya. Can you fill it up for me as the reviewer? Kasi ibang form din yon. Again, yes, kaya niya. Well, it doesn't actually fill up the form, but it will give you what to write for everything that's on the form. Now, what I found strange was when I asked it to fill up the reviewer form, it recommended approving the protocol. Without any questions dun sa ethics part, na yun yung una kong pinanggawa sa kanya, di ba? What are the ethics issues? So I asked again, what ethical issues in this protocol need clarification? So nag-backtrack siya. Sabi niya, oo, meron. Okay? So, and this time, the list that came out was longer and somewhat different from the original list of ethical concerns. So this informed consent section was in the earlier output, but the questions here are different and more specific to the protocol. Kasi nga, it already had the reviewer form. So the previous output had data security. Here, it's more of data anonymization and data sharing. And when I look at the questions, ang hirap na nung mga tanong compared dun sa previous output niya. So given that video recordings, so this is an example question, given that video recordings might capture sensitive information about participants' appearances and behaviors, how will the research team ensure that these recordings are adequately anonymized? What are the specific methods being used for de-identification of video data? And how will the research team address the potential for facial recognition technology to be used with video data even after anonymization? So the previous output did not have clarificatory questions as well about the intervention and the role of the Community Advisory Board. Dito, meron na. Okay? So I think it matters how you prompt it. And that's why if you go online, people always say you need to learn prompt engineering. Pero for a long time, before I gave this presentation last year, inisip ko, sasabihin ko ba yun sa kanila? Am I opening a Pandora's box? What use will be made of this is the question. But, everyone knows that the Pandora's box has long been opened. Anyway, Nickel warns that this can be both a risk and an opportunity. One use case is researchers will use an LLM before submitting their protocol for review. It can be a risk. Why? Because it will be used to game the review process. I will revise the protocol in a way that avoids flagging by the LLM. The analogy is how we now have AI tools to humanize LLM written essays so as to escape detection by software detecting AI-generated content. So, but it can also be an opportunity if you are an early career researcher and you need help. You can identify early any potential impacts on human subjects stemming from your protocol. And so, kung nagtataka po kayo bakit yung poster ay may sand, okay? Because when AI can do things for us, the question naturally arises, who should do what? Where is the line separating acceptable from unacceptable? Yeralan and Lee offer the sand heap paradox to think this through. Imagine a sand heap. When does a sand heap become a non-heap as you remove grains of sand one by one? When there is only one grain of sand left, it is no longer a heap, certainly, but where did the transition occur? So, dinadahan-dahan po kasi nila tayo eh. Word processors already have spelling and grammar checkers, diba? When does the use of generative AI in a word processor, Copilot, become academically unacceptable? When it suggests rephrasing a sentence, okay ba? When it suggests editing the paragraph, outlining the report, actually writing the research, nasaan po yung line? Hanggang saan? For AI to assist in ethics review, when does a sand heap become a non-heap? So in the World Health Organization guidance document for ethics and governance of AI for health, because I am a physician, the World Health Organization warns against automation bias, where physicians might use large multimodal models to make decisions when there are competing ethical or moral considerations. And for some people, they might think it's more objective, okay? But it's not. So who warns against moral deskilling? What is moral deskilling? So Green points on example in aviation. While it is technically possible to automate every aspect of air travel, sino pong sasakay na aeroplano dito, airlines have reserved autopilot only for the boring and eventful parts of the flight. The takeoff and landing, which require the most skill, are reserved for pilots so that they do not become dependent on emergency. So, Green says it's probably possible to autopilot a lot of morality. Example, do not lie, do not steal, do not commit violence. But there are some very truly difficult ethical situations in life, like resisting pressure to do evil, discerning the right action, judging complex cases where we need to rely on our own skills. So here he says, moral de-skilling is the loss of skill at making moral decisions due to lack of experience and practice. As we develop intelligence technologies which will make decisions for us, we will delegate decision-making capacities to these technologies, and humans will become de-skilled at making moral decisions unless we endeavor not to be so. And so we must resist. Uh, Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isip Tan. Very succinct yet very impactful. The floor is now open for questions for both our in-person audience and our Zoom and even Facebook participants. Sino yung unang bibo natin for today? Hi, live audience. Again, informal and casual naman tayo. No pressure. Oh, okay. Hi. Hi, what's... Do you feel ambushed? Hi, what's your name? Do you consent to letting us know?
I'm Nilian Roque po. So may ambush yung question. Pero actually, I was thinking this question po na you mentioned na mayroong line po.
Hello.
Okay, hello. Di ba na-mention niyo po na mayroong line between yung ethical use po ng LLMs. So for the medical use po, saan po yung line ngayon po? Na, for example, what if a doctor might use LLMs for their decisions when it comes to may magpapa-check up po ganun. Baka hindi po siya familiar with the ano po yung disease po or ano po yung status po ng patient. So, ano po yung line po nga na acceptable sa doctors ngayon when it comes to the use of LLMs?
Okay, so if we're going to talk about the popular LLMs, so Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, these are not regulated for medicine, which means they are not to be used in medicine. These LLMs that we have that are popular are what we call general purpose large language models. We actually have biomedical large language models that are in development that use PubMed abstracts, clinical practice guidelines. So they are well versed in medical knowledge. And yet, none of them has been, for example, submitted to the FDA for regulation, that somebody can say whatever it says, we can rely on it. And so if you look at the biomedical literature now, there's a lot of papers on creating, for example, patient scenarios and then checking whether ChatGPT got it correct. There's a famous study where they had ChatGPT take the medical licensure exam, sort of, in the US, and it scored 86%. But the doctors say, but that's just knowledge. It doesn't mean that if you pass the exam, that's all you need to actually treat people. And so I also hold medical educator workshops on AI for faculty, because how can you teach something that you don't know? And in fact, it's our students who are very good at already using it, but they're using it for studying. So I usually discourage people to use these LLMs for actually managing patients. I do not see a future where the doctor will let go of diagnosing the patient. But certainly, we can use ChatGPT to generate a list of differentials. Like what could the possible diagnosis be if parang we need help, but it's not going to be the AI who's going to diagnose. So what I did, we had a clinical pathologic conference last year. So what is a clinical pathologic conference? It's about a patient who has died, who has undergone autopsy. So we know exactly what happened to the patient. And then we ask someone to read the case and to diagnose what happened to the patient. And that person would not know what the actual autopsy result will be. So it's an exercise we go through in medicine so we can hone our diagnostic skills. So what I did, I had someone who was still a resident in internal medicine on one side, plus ChatGPT. And on the other end, we had a professor emeritus who is a good pulmonologist, okay? And then I had to give them the case in steps. So this is the patient, the history. What do you think? And then they will write down their diagnosis. The resident can ask ChatGPT for help. And in the end, both of them were able to get the diagnosis. So for me, that meant that there is possible use for these LLMs so that someone in training can leapfrog and sort of become a professor emeritus, right? At least in the diagnostics part, there's some evidence of that. But what we had to do was to make sure that the resident would first write his list of differentials before he asked ChatGPT, because we don't want him to just rely on what ChatGPT tells him. So the framing here, it's not the LLM versus the doctor. It's a doctor with an LLM versus a doctor who has not an LLM. So it's very complex. Sorry, my answer is so long. But basically, I'm campaigning for everyone that AI should be used as a tool, but never to replace human doctors.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was a very much appreciated long answer. No worries. And thank you for letting us ambush you. That was a really cool question. We gained a lot from it. Next question, maybe from our in-person attendees. Pasensya na po. Ayan. Savior sa recitation. Hi, what's your name?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Tara, and I wrote down my question. So the question that I wanted to ask is, if it is inevitable that some doctors or some medical researchers would ever use these AIs, so what measures do you think should be in place to protect patient privacy when AI systems process large-scale bioinformatic data sets?
Okay, so that's a very difficult question, and we've grappled with that. And one of the suggestions is to have our own LLM. Okay. So right now they're saying that we don't have to produce our own LLM. We can get, for example, a foundational model and fine-tune it for our use. However, to make sure that whatever data we put into it remains with us, it has to be hosted and run by us with all the necessary protections like informed consent, etc. The difficult thing is because this is ethics. If I ask the patient, I'm going to put your data in the LLM, and the patient will say, ano po yun? What are the implications? Because it has to be an informed consent. So if they cannot understand what you're doing with their data, dun pa lang wala na, parang ganyan. And so we cannot put patient data in the hands of companies over which we have no control of. So there's interest in open source large language models. And earlier this year, we got a visit from somebody from Yale who was actually offering Meditron. Meditron is a biomedical large language model that they have put online actually. But they're asking people to fine tune it, meaning ask it questions that are local to us, to our local healthcare context, so that it can train the model further. And the agreement was, if you are able to fine tune it to a degree that we will agree on, we will give you the model for your own and you can keep it. However, we were also trying to see how much is that going to cost? Hosting the model, running it, and the very conservative estimate of a small deployment is about $8 US an hour. And it's going to keep on running. forever. $8 an hour. And I don't even know like how many people can it serve at one time, right? So you can understand why, for example, ChatGPT charges $20 per month for one person and how many people are actually subscribed. And second, people have been telling me there are environmental costs also to running our own, hosting our own LLMs. It has a water footprint, is what they tell me, because you need to cool this GPUs. And so for me, to answer your question, we need to have our own. But how we're going to get there is something else. I do know that some LLMs will offer you your own local deployment, but they will also charge. So sustainability is the problem. The other thing with the reason why I was asked to do this lecture also was because it's also difficult for ethics reviewers to review AI protocols because they have their own language. We have computer scientists here. So they have their own language and we don't actually understand sometimes what is it they're going to do. And so we need some sort of standard setting. And for medical research, we have the Spirit AI and the Consort AI. So these are standards for reporting randomized controlled trials that use AI and also like the data, etc. And one of the things that is included there is when you do the research, you already should visualize where in the clinical workflow the AI is going to be used. Because if you don't even know that, then it might not even benefit patients, which means it will be wasted research. So for example, somebody said, why can't we do an AI to read chest x-rays? Kaya nagagalit na yung mga radiologists, diba? So parang, okay, if you develop it, and then who will use it? If the radiologists refuse to use it, then wala na yung project mo. Or if there is consent from the patient, okay lang po ba sa'yo, Nay, ang magbabasa ng x-ray mo, hindi tao, yung AI, papayag kaya siya? Alam mo yun? So, you raise a very important question and we are trying to grapple with that because talaga namang limited ang resources natin eh. Diba? So our data sets don't even make it into the training set. So we really need our own, but how? So thanks for raising that question.
Absolutely. My brain got so much thicker from hearing the answers to that question. Oh, okay, great. Of course.
Right, it's supposed to be make our own. So then I wanted to ask, like, so what comes besides the environmental things of making our own? Are there any benefits besides the like protection of data? Because from what I know, for to give an example, lang, is like right one university like LaSalle, they made their own AI already for their students. So was that the motivation behind it because they wanted to protect the data that their students might produce for the school or like yun lang.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
aside from data protection, there are proprietary processes. So for example, if you work in a company, I know of one company that says you are not allowed to use Claude or ChatGPT or any other LLM because you might be inputting data there that's proprietary for our company. So that's actually a data leak. So, but they need the workers to use AI to make their work more efficient. So therefore, the solution was have our own LLM inside the company. It's a corporate LLM. So everybody can use it and we're not afraid that whatever is proprietary is going to leak out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Well, we will now look into our Zoom participants' questions. First question. Some ethical review boards are considering using so-called AI detection tools to measure the proportion of texts that were generated from the use of LLMs. Then they set limits, for example, not more than 30%. May I get your comments?
So that is a common question because these companies that sell this AI generated content detectors want us to believe that they can really detect. But I don't know. In my conversations with other computer scientists, they say that it is not foolproof. And there is a recent publication that says researchers from the global south are more likely to be flagged as being AI generated because we're not the first speakers of English, right? This is not our first language. So usually when we write in English, it may be stilted or different in some way with how Westerners actually write in English, and that might be flagged by the LLM as actually AI generated. Now, I have a friend who's actually in linguistics and is also a computer scientist. And he was saying, for example, that there might be a way to detect it using linguistics because he says that AI generated content, when you look at it, it somehow looks like six people wrote it instead of one. Okay. But then I say, like, how do you incorporate linguistics? It's going to be much more difficult to actually do it. So my fear when we use AI generated content detectors is that we might accuse people wrongly. Okay? Kasi sa amin, first do no harm, right? And the default should always be that we trust the researcher. But we know that sometimes that's not possible. That's why we now have offices for research integrity. So my opinion is you can use them if you want to, but you should know that it is not foolproof. And you better make sure before you start accusing people that it is AI generated content. Now, in terms of declarations, that's what I would actually suggest. In our form in the UP Manila, there's actually a tick box already that says, I used AI, and then you have to specify where did you use it. So, for example, you can say to improve my grammar or to whatever it is, the way you used it. Okay. And in my other lecture. I have another lecture about that. There are many ways that people want it done. I put it in the methods part or do I put it in the supplementary notes? Do I put it as a bibliographic entry in the references? Where do I put it? Most people would say put it in the methods part because for sure it will be read if it's there. If you put it somewhere else, baka hindi na yon mapansin. Second, the strictest one that I saw was they require you to put the URL. So remember when you chat with ChatGPT, di ba, you can publish the conversation and it will give you a URL. So they recommend that you put the URL so that if I were a very conscientious editor, I will click the URL and actually see what you asked, what it said, and what's in your protocol. But again, it really makes the process now more lengthy, diba? And more difficult. But this is where we are right now. And we have to actually make these decisions about what we're going to do.
Thank you so much, Doc. I'm very, very informed now. I hope everyone else is as well. Maybe our next question from Zoom. Oh, essay. Hopefully not GPT generated. Anyway, second question. Just this morning, I was informed about a possible case of concept plagiarism of our book chapter. The one who did it is a co-author who used how we framed the framework but applied it to a different context. I asked ChatGPT to compare the first two pages of the new book chapter under the same publishing company and our full book chapter and full book chapter, sorry about that. And AI concluded that the new first two pages is derivative of our book chapter. The author of the new book chapter claimed that the analysis of ChatGPT is only LLM, but my group totally agrees that the new book chapter is a derivative of our book chapter without acknowledgement. The person claimed that a lawyer was consulted because of our conversation, because I was asking for acknowledgement of the conceptual framework, but she claimed that ChatGPT is not reliable when it comes to comparative analysis of the two documents, and definitely it will appear like a derivative because the same framework was used. What is your comment on this?
Wow. Well, I am not a lawyer. That's one. But this has also been something that has been asked before. Can we ask AI to check if it's AI, right? So it's very meta. And it's really not parang decided whether we could do that. So because, for example, I've had some teachers come up to me and say, like, this is the assignment I gave, and then this is the reply of the student. Did this come from you? Imagine asking ChatGPT, did you give this answer to my student? So definitely ChatGPT will not answer that. But this is a very serious case, and I know that I'm not sure if we have legal precedent. The problem is, what goes into the training data sets and how, for example, the chapter was constructed. Okay. So as I told you, I teach, trying to teach some AI tools for research, no? And one of the things that LLMs can do is actually summarize papers. So I won't be surprised, for example, if the original book was summarized and then it comes out in the summary. And I don't know what happened, whether they wanted to use it or not, and how it was phrased, um, and whether it was not acknowledged by the LLM that was used originally. Because there are LLMs where you can turn on web search. Okay. So for example, if I want to be sure that will only look at what I give it, I turn off the web search and say that only look at this particular references. But when it summarizes na and then you're not careful, it will not cite sometimes. And then you just take it as part of whatever it is and then you write it in the new one. I don't really know what happened here. Okay? But I think baka nga umabot po sa legal. Kasi nga, it will be they will have to sort of prove, 'di ba, kung paano ba 'yon. Natakot akong sumagot Pero this is an example of how things are now. Yeah. That's why it's hard. Okay? Sir, anong sinasabi mo dyan? Baka you might want to to share.
Hello. Just looking at the case kasi, I think regardless if they use Chat GPT or whatever, the co-author is the one who did this is a co-author, so it is within his rights as co-author
Yes.
to make a derivative out of what he did.
Yes.
So, yun lang yung yun lang yung comment ko dito. Regardless kung
Okay.
kung if ever kasi kung hindi siya co-author,
Okay.
yun may issue ng
Okay.
plagiarism.
Ah,
Yun. But since he's a co-author, he is within his rights
okay.
to make a derivative of his
Oo,
work,
yung original.
of the original.
Mhm.
Even siguro citation could be self citation ko ba to prevent citation to prevent self plagiarism siguro po pwede to diffuse yung tension with
Okay.
his other co-authors.
Okay.
Oo.
Oo.
Pero yun
So,
lang yung comment.
si Sir may
for this.
backstory. Yun ang sinasabi mo. Na beyond the world of AI, may backstory siya. Okay. Oo.
It's a new Osho.
Oo. So, it's an issue of authorship, not of the AI. Okay. Thank you po. Okay.
Okay, next Zoom question. Good day po. How can our school ensure that all research projects involving AI are strictly aligned with ethical guidelines? And what specific checklist or steps should we follow to implement and monitor these ethical standards effectively? P.S. We do not have a formal ethics committee in school.
Okay, so perhaps we need to ask them to sign some sort of declaration. Okay, so I have not used AI, check, sign, or I have used AI and then give some categories if you're fond of checklist, exactly what. But of course, this all relies on self-declaration and absent any other mechanism, that might be a place to start. Because actually policing them as to whether they actually did what they supposed to have declared that they did is another thing, right? And so when we talk about the world of researchers and we, for example, undergo good clinical practice workshops or ethical research workshops. This is a thing that we learn. To safeguard research, we need to be um, always thinking about everyone's rights, our academic integrity. So hopefully the checklist, if there is one, is a declaration of what we're actually doing. Okay. And let's see if people actually declare. But for people to declare, you actually need to be in an environment where it is not stigmatized that you are using AI. Because we also have that in our schools where they say, oh, you used AI and that casts doubt on your output automatically. Which is why now, when I do my presentations, as you saw, I actually have started disclosing. Okay. It's sort of for me modeling and then looking at the audience to see if anyone is going to object. So I was, for example, at a nephrology annual convention where I asked Claude to make a diagram. Okay. And it actually made the diagram well. And so I actually used it. And I said that in my conflict of interest, I declared that I used Claude to generate some diagrams. And in that slide where I had that diagram, I had it credited. Claude 3.7 Sonnet was used to make this diagram. And I waited to see if people were going to say something. And the people were asking, how'd you do that? So it wasn't really um, but it was more of like, how can we do that? And I think because when they see that you cannot just make it generate that without thinking of the prompt very well, that there is some effort on your part to actually have that output, maybe there will be a better appreciation. I don't know. But so people will not declare kasi if they think that it will blow back on them. So we need to have that conversation where we say, AI is a tool and we need to discuss how we're going to use it. Recently, in a medical school, I was told that medical students, so people give lectures in medical school, right? And the students, they transcribe our lectures. What they do now is they give the transcription to ChatGPT. And then they say, ChatGPT, make me a summary table of the lecture to help me study. And so we were discussing it in the faculty. Is that acceptable use or not? And then they told, the discussion would go like, they didn't ask my permission for the transcription to be put there. Or maybe we should look na lang at the table and see if it's actually correct, right? What is lost if the student no longer does the tables? Because when I was a medical student, I would make the tables myself as a study guide, but now it generates it. So what is lost when that happens? And then we need to have a conversation with the student. Okay. And then they're very creative with prompts. So I was saying, okay, if it's a table that says disease and then manifestations, test, management, what if it's not in the lecture? What happens? And then they said, we tell it not to put anything that's not in the lecture. So you will see an empty cell. Okay. And then what happens to the empty cell? Oh, we research about it and put whatever is needed there. So for me, okay, there's some effort, right? But we need to sort of have a consensus. Is that okay or not okay? So that's this thing when you have checklist in terms of research. Kaya nga, yun yung poster natin, the sand-heap paradox. Hanggang saan? And that has to be decided by us, the researcher community, I think.
Thank you po, Dr. Isip Tan. Baka po sa audience merong gustong makichika with us today. Okay. Are we proceeding with Zoom? All right. Ay, meron pa pala. Hi! Hi, no worries. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm so sorry. I have another
It's
question.
okay, it's okay.
Okay, so I wanted to ask because from like personal experience, I had an instance where in class my prof was arguing with me that I used AI, but I didn't. So then he showed me that the AI checker marked it as like what 80%, 90, kanon. And then nagtaka ako because I didn't use it, right? So then I tried proving that no matter what I put, even if it's just random sentences, it actually still flags as AI. So then how can you ensure that, oh, sure, yeah, I did use AI. Look in this checker. See, I used it. But then the AI itself for checking is already unreliable. So how can you say that this is ethical?
Exactly. See, that's exactly the situation we're trying to avoid, where educators will think it's reliable and solely on the basis of that output of the checker, go to the student and accuse the student that you used an AI generator. So when we talk in the education field about what are we supposed to do, well, we're supposed to know our students. Okay, we're supposed to know our students. You're supposed to be able to say, did he or she write this? What do I think? Is the level of participation in my class, or is the performance in other parts of the class parang consistent with the output that is being submitted to me? I can tell you that some educators have now shifted to having oral exams and not having anything text written because they fear that, LLMs are being used to generate the output. Okay. So there's really no reliability as you have shown. Okay. But we need to be talking to each other about how are we going to address this. So let me tell you of another example. Someone told me we caught one student using AI. And why did they, it was like a research paper, term paper, something like that. Why did they catch the student? Because the student cited a 1945 paper, which you cannot even access online. Okay. So it's like when they asked the student, where did you get the paper that you used here, 1945? And the student outrightly said, I got it from the LLM. Okay. Because there was no other way. Um, So I think it's going to be little clues about what is submitted to us. If we know our students well, it's your spidey sense. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't know. Okay. And so that's why my caution lang nga is never rely on this AI content generator checker, mga ganyan. Yun, we cannot rely on them. I think we are venturing into dangerous waters when we do. Kaya if you look at the UNESCO principles of AI for AI competency framework for teachers and students, they always say human-centered. Okay? So, yun. I wish I could give you some more. Hopefully that experience did not scar you too much.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you again for your wonderful question. Doc, by the way, we just like to inform you, pwede po kayo umupo in case it's a struggle.
It's okay.
We usually have presenters
Okay.
naman po. It's an informal event. Okay, next question from Zoom. Follow
Medyo
up from the
siya.
previous question. The author didn't acknowledge that it is a derivative of the original. We are asking acknowledgement. The person admitted that ChatGPT is used to improve the writing of the paper. Indeed, the manuscript looks like it's written by different persons, perhaps because ChatGPT was used in different instances. What are the limits of use of ChatGPT in help in writing a manuscript?
The Sandhi paradox, ganun. Hindi. So when you declare how you used it, where you used it, and perhaps if it was used in over 90% and you didn't write anything else, maybe that's, you can definitely say that's too much. But where is the 90%? Should I say 50%, 40%, 30%? Nobody knows eh. Kasi even yung 30% nga dun sa, ano, di ba, detector, that's something that we just set. Di ba? Parang who said na dapat 30%? And so, it behooves us to actually look at how is this going to affect research? Okay? So, for example, I talk about, okay, you can upload a PDF, then ask it to summarize the research paper. I have even asked the LLM to do a critically appraised topic. So we do have journal clubs in medicine where we look at the journal and we have a form that is called the critically appraised topic. So meron kong mga tanong, no, is the trial randomized? Is the trial, did it use intention to treat? Did it do this, this, this? And the LLM can actually already do that for you. But the purpose of that exercise was for the researcher, the newbie, reading a research article to get a sense of how it's supposed to be. But if the LLM already does it, So how do you, you are you are relegated to checking lang whether it is correct. Hopefully there is some learning there, but I don't know because I wasn't trained to do research that way. But this is how our current generation might be doing it if it were possible. So as educators, it is our job to make sure that we set the limits. Pero how do we do that ba? By consensus, right? So kung maglo-lawyer tayo dito, baka sila yung mag-explain kung di ko alam, baka meron po sa intellectual property law or whatever. I don't know kung meron bang percentage.
Thank you, Doc, and thank you for the follow-up question. Maybe we can move on to the next one. Congrats, Doc, for the comprehensive talk. My question is, what are some legal inputs or bases to be included in the ethical review framework? Thank you.
Ala, kakasabi ko lang po, I am not a lawyer. But definitely parang, kasi di ba pag sa law, ang understanding ko is you need to have jurisprudence, which means you need to have cases filed, and then somebody makes a decision that becomes the basis for something as an extension of the law. The only law that we have right now comes from the European Union. So they have an AI Act. Okay. And we do not have that yet here in the Philippines. My understanding is even in the US, they don't have an AI Act yet. And so I think when you have these big laws or regulations, then that will put forth some more little laws or regulations. But in the AI Act, what it actually says is when looking at applications of AI, we have to determine the risk. Okay? So if it's a grammar checker, that's a low risk. So they will not be regulating it too much, right? But if it's an AI that helps the doctor read an X-ray or diagnose something, definitely that's a high risk application. They need to undergo what might be the same as what we would ask for a drug development approval process, meaning you have to run trials, randomized control, prove to us that it is safe. In terms of the research process, I think legality comes into it when you declare, right? If you declare, I did not use AI and sign, I think that's something that's part of if any legalities actually arise, right? Because you actually wrote on it. But that is my only limited answer as to the question. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Doc. We will move on to one of our in-person attendees. Hi, sir. You were raising your hand.
Hello, I'm George. Thank you for your lecture, Doc. It's not really questions. I would just give a recommendation that this questions like involving legal things would be clearly answered maybe on Saturday because the College of Law, the Malcolm Hall, will conduct lecture seminar, I think, regarding artificial intelligence and the law. So those people in the audience who are interested to raise these questions, they can visit Malcolm or raise these questions online. That's just my comment because these are very interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I should attend that as well. So the next time I am asked, I also know something. Thank you.
Another in-person attendee. Hi, Elaine.
Hello, Doc. I'd like to ask your personal take on giving credit to large language models like ChatGPT. Kasi in one of your answers po kanina, you mentioned citing Claude. So do you think it's appropriate to cite LLMs such as ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude in research, especially when the information they generate isn't truly original, but based on training data that may not have been openly or willingly provided by the original authors? And another follow-up is how can we ensure that the use of large language models is properly recognized as the use of a tool while also making sure that the original sources of knowledge are credited appropriately?
Okay. So when I said cite earlier, it was because people were asking when we declare our use of LLM, should it be in the reference list? Okay. But as I said, most of the people agree it should instead be placed in the methods part. The other question being, can Claude be or ChatGPT be cited as a co-author? And the answer is no. Because as a co-author, you have responsibilities to fulfill, and that cannot be fulfilled by any LLM. The moral responsibility to stand up for your work, etc. I'm trying to find my, I have a whole other slide deck just about that on authorship. And they actually offer four ways in which they approach that question on why they're saying Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini cannot actually be cited as an author. Hopefully, I can find it in time. Oo. Mm-mm.
I think ma'am kasi there's another issue. Of course, it's very different from the case right now. Pero it also generated some concerns when certain co-authors co-authored their pets. Kaya lang kasi the pets actually carried the last names of their owners. And of course, yung justification nga doon that they provided support when they were performing yung pagsusulat ng paper, yung ganon. And of course, it generated debate na what is really an author? And would that be okay? That kind of contribution, does that already
Okay.
equate to to authorship?
So there is it's not showing there, but there is an article by Hosseini et al. In 2023 in Research Ethics that you can look at. So the argument was, if the AI made a substantial contribution to the manuscript, should we credit it as co-author? And they maintain that AI cannot be authors because they do not have free will and thus cannot be morally or legally responsible or accountable. What authors consent to the manuscript's final form is an exercise of free will that I already agreed that this is the way it should be published. So that is why they're saying we shouldn't. And now here we have the policy options that that we need to look at. And so the first one is ban the use. The second is allow AIs to be listed as authors. The third is allow AIs to be listed in acknowledgement. You only acknowledge people. Okay. And then the last is disclose AI use, either in the body of the text or in the references. And Hosseini was actually recommending that that is what should be done to actually disclose. And he was suggesting a way to do that. As in, you have to say which model and in fact when. So it's not enough to say I used Claude 3.7 Sonnet. I have to say I used it May 15, 2025, because the responses can actually vary over time. And then, like I said, you need to save your interaction, provide the URL because it also matters by who. So it's sort of taking credit also away from the model because you only gave me an answer, I gave you a prompt, something like that. So we need to discuss whether this is what we're going to do because this is a suggestion from Hosseini.
Meron pa po ba? Any more questions?
Interested po kasi ako dito eh. Where can I read more about this?
Sir, that's the tawag doon? Reference. Hosseini, Resnick, and Holmes, 2023. The title is The Ethics of Disclosing the Use of Artificial Intelligence Tools in Writing Scholarly Manuscripts. I have one more that's more recent that just came out last month. So every time something comes out, I always read it. Okay? Kasi nga, yun na yung ask sa akin. Can you do a workshop on how to write using AI? Sabi ko, no.
The reason I'm interested here is because sa Plaridel Journal po ako. That's why I can relate din dun sa previous question.
Na co-author.
Oo. We use yung fourth policy din, yung disclosure.
Okay.
Yan. There should be disclosure. We also use yung Turnitin to detect yung
Yes.
AI. And we have a limit of 30%. Although I go as low as 25%.
Okay.
But what I do kasi is I'm not accusing naman agad yung yung author.
Okay.
In a maayos na paraan,
Okay.
sinasabi ko sa'yo, could you please disclose your use
Okay.
of AI?
Okay.
We just turn it in and it detected so and so.
Okay.
No?
So
Can
parang
you
it's a
please
query.
clarify?
It's
Yeah.
a query.
So please clarify and can you please include a disclosure in your paper that you use AI, or if you use AI, on what extent, ganon. So yun yung ginagawa namin. So that's why I'm very
But
interested.
it's not in your form when they submit, because now in UP Manila, what I know is they put it on the form already to disclose right away.
Right now po, kasi ginagawa ko pa lang yung yung policy ko na yon, and although ad hoc yung policy ko na ginagawa na ganon, we intend to put it sa nasa information for authors na.
Yeah.
Yung disclosure for AI.
Or parang even if you don't disclose, we will run it through Turnitin.
Yes, even if we don't disclose it, we run it. Kaya rin ako nag-attend ng ganitong to get more insights on how to craft yung policy. And so this helped a lot dun sa ginagawa ko. Kaya maraming salamat po.
Thank you. We are all grappling. Yes.
Yes.
May one last question.
Yes,
kasi.
actually that's
Mas
exactly what
exciting
we
pa yun.
have time for. Maraming thank you so much sa ating mga Zoom participants and in-person participants. But sorry din po kasi ito na lang po yung question na ma-accommodate namin according to our tech staff. Maraming thank you, as we mentioned, kasi nga you were very active. Last question. So, would you say you still advocate to write papers and do research without the assistance of AI? What advice can you give to those in the generation who are still fearful or still in the learning stage of using AI for research or in general for that matter?
Okay. So just last Saturday, I held a workshop for medical educators. In June, we're planning to hold an AI workshop for research tools. Okay. This is what I tell the faculty. We cannot enact policy unless we have tried the tools ourselves. And the emphasis has been ensuring academic integrity of our students. And when I say Pandora's box, I tell the faculty, once you learn how to do prompt engineering and you engage with these LLMs and can actually see how they answer very complex questions and you get impressed, you will now question your own academic integrity. Okay? So when I gave a workshop for students on research tools, I had them try ChatGPT to help them rephrase, for example, their research question. But the term is rephrase, okay? Meaning you have a research question and you want help with sort of like a 360 view on how I can look at the different facets of the question that you want to do research on. The other thing is I asked them to try Research Rabbit, and Research Rabbit is what they call the Spotify for research. If you input one journal article, it will find all the other articles connected to that. It has a citation graph. Okay. So what is that useful for? Literature review. Okay. But they teach us how to search using PubMed, di ba? Boolean, and, or, author, ganyan. There is a science to that. That is evidence-based medicine. And sasabihin mo sa akin, Research Rabbit na lang. Okay, so what did we do in the workshop? I had the students do it on Research Rabbit and I had them do it on PubMed. And we looked at whether we found the same articles or not. And some of them were saying it didn't come out. Or I searched here, the best way I know how on PubMed, but Research Rabbit still showed me some articles that didn't come out in my search. So if you ask me, do I say we don't do research without AI? Ako kasi parang if there are tools available, before we recommend it, we have to try it ourselves. And when I talked to the students and told them about these tools, I told them exactly how I use it. Like I don't use it to write the paper, definitely not. I use it to find papers here on Research Rabbit, for example. I told them about Notebook LM. Notebook LM is a Google product where you can upload as many as 50 PDFs and it will make a podcast out of it. So, what do I use that for? To get a general overview of the literature. But definitely, what comes out in the podcast, do I put that in my paper? I do not. But you see, it's a matter of your own academic integrity. Who's to say now that what you wrote wasn't influenced by that, right? So when we say, okay, as an educator, I will say no one use AI, but they will. So how will I guide them? We need to use it ourselves, and then so we can tell them this is the appropriate use, okay? Or at least try to put some limits to it. Kasi only the experts can test the limits. So for example, I am a PhD student. I have a literature review of 85 references. I tried to run that in Research Rabbit. And I tried to see whether it found some new ones. It did. So I'm grateful that it found some new ones. But how it actually does it, you need to examine why did this paper come out? Because one of the sub-authors was this, was this. But if you just sort of like, okay, yun na yun. Alam mo yun? So it's a matter of the effort we put into it. So no, I am not in the camp of no AI tools. I will say, let's use AI tools, but use them responsibly. And it's scary because a new AI tool always comes out every time. And so I tell students, don't ask me about AI tools I have not tried. I will never say yes or no to using whatever that AI tool is unless I have used it myself.
Salamat, Doc. And again, pasensya na po sa mga questions na hindi natin ma-accommodate. Napaka-active niyo po and we love that energy. Kung hindi namin nabasa yung questions niyo, it's not you, it's us. We have time constraints. Again, we are very grateful to Dr. Iris PL Isiptan for her wonderful talk and her engagement with us today. And we would now like to call on the UPD Rep Coordinator to further express our gratitude. Here we have the certificate of appreciation and some photos. We are immensely grateful that we were able to hear and attain those invaluable insights on AI and ethics review. We would also like to thank our attendees, of course, for having a discursive lunch with us. Again, for online attendees, your QR code for the evaluation form is being flashed on the screen and also linked in the Zoom chat box. Check the chat box. And for our on-site attendees, your QR code for the evaluation form is by the registration area with Senator, Congressman, Councilor Flora Tagiling. Goodbye and see you. Follow UPD Reb on social media at UPD Reb on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and at reb.upd on Instagram. Subscribe to UPD Reb's YouTube channel at UPD Liman Reb for the recorded episodes of Mess. Thank you everyone for making Mess an incredible success. Thank you.